Hello and welcome to our marriage course, and the topic tonight is conflict resolution. I love doing weddings. In fact, I did a wedding this weekend where everybody goes home thinking they're going to live happily ever after. She's dreaming of her white picket fence. He's thinking, I'm never going to have another light alone in my whole life. And then it happens. One of them wakes up in the morning and says, "Who tricked me? I didn't sign up for this. This person that I married is not the person that I thought they were." And the first discomfort, the first little testiness, the first fight begins. Maybe the trigger was her snore. Maybe it was his in-laws. Maybe it was the finances. But something caused the discomfort. Now, this is no surprise to God. I mean, God says in the most famous verse in the whole Bible about marriage, that Ephesians chapter 5, "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife." And this is a profound mystery. The mystery of a man and a woman who are so different coming together. Now, the coming together in that mysterious union involves a bit of rub, involves a bit of conflict. And we need to be able to navigate our way through that. You can go and look at the readings and the writings and the findings of all the major research institutes in the world that investigate marriage, and they will tell you the number one indicator for marriage longevity is not compatibility. It's not interests. It's not falling in love. The major indicator of longevity of marriage is the ability to resolve conflict. And so this is a life skill that we need to teach our kids. This is a life skill that we daren't go into marriage without. The fact that there's going to be a conflict is undisputable. I mean, if a couple goes their entire life and never argues, never has a disagreement, they probably don't have a life. I can remember going to spend some time overseas to help a particular church. And the first evening that Sue and I arrived, we were sitting in the lounge of this couple who was in ministry, and there was this almighty bust-up. She was shouting, he was shouting. We were quite traumatized. We went to bed that night thinking, what the heck? But straight afterwards, they kissed, made up, were all lovey-dovey. That couple is still married 30-something years later. The fact that there is conflict is not what is dangerous for a marriage. The inability to resolve that conflict is the problem. So I'm going to give a quick talk today on the rules for a clean fight. You know, in a boxing ring, when people go toe-to-toe and there's a conflict, the referee pulls them apart and says, no punching below the belt, no punching after the bell goes. We want a clean fight. And so we've got to learn how to fight clean to live long in the land of marriage. And so let me look at some things that are required for you not to do if you want to keep the fight clean. Firstly, it says in Ephesians chapter 4, do not let the sun go down on your anger. If there's issues between you, the Bible suggests that it's a very good idea to resolve that thing before you guys go to sleep. Otherwise, because this is what happens. You see, depending on your personality, some of you are like cowboys. You just want to sort that thing out immediately, and you want to let it all hang out, like my friends overseas. Others, though, are like Eskimos. You want to hide in your little igloo, and you frost people out of your life. And the problem is, it's the Eskimos who want to bury it and not look at it today. If you're married to an Eskimo, or you yourself are an Eskimo, the Bible says to you, do not let the sun go down on your anger. Secondly, do not generalize. If you say to somebody, you always do this, or you never do that, you know, it takes the present and it drags into it everything from the past. You never, ever help me around the house. And like he's thinking, I fixed the gutter yesterday. I mowed the lawn the day before. But he never just complicates and you're never going to solve a problem today if you drag the whole of your marital history into every combat. Number 3, the Bible says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 that a husband must not separate from his wife. I've heard marriage counselors say when two cowboys are fighting each other, just take time apart. You go stay with your parents, you go stay with your parents. Hey, listen, 1 Corinthians says, do not separate. You say, God, but that verse is mainly talking about divorce. True, but when you start becoming familiar and running back to your parents or running to your friends when there's combat, the only time that would be advisable if there's physical abuse, and then the authorities need to be involved anyway. Number 4, do not blame. Rather, express pain. And if you in the habit of saying, you stupid idiot, you haven't done this right, you haven't done that right, rather to say, I'm hurt. You see, I'm hurt will disarm, whereas blame will put someone on the defensive. Number 5, your combat should not go into the public domain. You know what? Love covers a multitude of sin. Now, I'm not saying keep secret things that need to be talked about with a confidential third party, but I'm talking about hanging all the washing out on the line. You take your combat into your staff room. You take your combat onto your social media friends. Suddenly, your issues with your spouse are now contaminated by the opinions and thoughts and perceptions of everybody else. It shouldn't be taken into the public domain. Number 6, do not keep any record of wrongs. When Paul is describing to the Corinthians what love is, in 1 Corinthians 13, that famous chapter on love, he says, love keeps no record of wrongs. I counseled a couple, must be 20 years ago, and he was an older man that had come out of the corporate world, and very early in their marriage, they had huge conflict trouble, and I came in as the pastor. And before the counseling session, though, he said, I want you to read something. So he dropped a diary in my postbox. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was a record of their combat. And he had got this out of a technique he had learned in the corporate world, that when you've got a grievance, is write in the grievance book. And so he instituted a grievance book on their lounge room dining room table. And so every time the fighting got, absolutely unmanageable, they would write their grievances down. But this is the problem. This is where we went wrong in this grievance book. Refer to page 165. This is what you did on that day. And so what was this? This was a record of wrongs. I remember sitting at that first counseling session, dropping the book into a waste paper basket, and him reaching for it. I'm saying, no, you coming to counseling for me? I put my foot on the book. I said, you are not going to keep a record of wrongs. This might work in the corporate world, but it's not going to work with your spouse. Number 7, do not use emotions as a weapon. Your emotions are very much part of you, and they're an expression of the virtues and the joy that God's put inside you. Sometimes the crying and sometimes the release of pain is in an emotional is done in an emotional way, but they are not intended to inflict harm. They're not intended to manipulate and to cause angst within your spouse. And so you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. When you use your emotions to manipulate, do not use them to manipulate. And number 8, the last rule that we for a clean fight, and what we should not do, is do not isolate your marriage. I learned very early on that I was to build bridges into my marriage in times of peace, so that in times of war, the counselors could walk over the bridges. When I'm talking about counselors, I'm talking people who you trust spiritually, who mature, who can speak into your marriage. If you build those friendships in times of peace, then when the battle is really raging, both of you, husband and wife, will accept the counsel as they walk in. Build the marriages in times of peace. So those are the rules of what not to do. That's hitting below the belt. That's hitting after the bell. But now, the Bible speaks and gives us some incredible tools of things we ought to do to bring the healing, to bring the union. Because that's the goal of marriage, isn't it? The goal of marriage is that the two become one. One in heart, one in mind, one in body, one in spirit. And so conflict is staying out of the danger zones, is dealing with issues, but bringing healing at the end. That's conflict resolution skills that are required. So number one, the greatest skill we can teach our children in resolving conflict and walk into marriages with is a humility that allows them to say sorry. God opposes proud people, but gives grace to the humble. You want to have grace the grace of God when you go and resolve a conflict with your spouse. And so the humility to say, I'm sorry, to even if it was 99% not your fault, the ability to say sorry is the road toward healing. Number two, an ability to forgive, even when they don't deserve the forgiveness. It doesn't mean you're just wiping over the issue and not resolving the conflict, but it's letting go of the pain and the hurt. You say, Grant, that's impossible. You don't know what he's done to me. It is impossible. Forgiveness this way is not a natural thing. In fact, in John 19, verse 19, it says, and he breathed on them. Jesus breathed on his disciples and he said, you need to receive my spirit. Because he was going to tell them to do something outrageous. He said, whoever you forgive is forgiven. Just like Jesus forgave. Remember, from the cross, he said, Father, forgive them. Remember when Stephen was getting martyred, he said, Father, forgive them. Stephen was filled with the Spirit. Jesus filled with the Spirit. He breathes on his disciples. He says, you need my Spirit to be able to live like this, to be able to forgive like this. And when you forgive in that way, it brings freedom, like it did over the people that were standing around the cross at Golgotha, like it did over the persecutors of Stephen when he was martyred. And so will it be with you as you learn to forgive. And then number three is to learn and to be sensitive to what the triggers are. I remember when we were newly married, the number one trigger that caused arguments with Sue and I was finances. In the history of our marriage, it has been our in-laws, it has been our children, it has been when we're really, really tired. And so to know where the triggers are helps you to walk gently and not stand on the landmines unnecessarily. Number four, invest in your marriage. Invest in times of peace. Invest all the time. I can remember once a man coming to me. He was exasperated. It was just before he got divorced. And I said to him, my friend, when did you last give your wife a gift? I was scratching for all the access points of him being able to love her. I said, when did you last give her some flowers? He said, hey, listen, bud, you don't know who I'm married. I'm married to the Antichrist, man. He said, if I take her some flowers, some roses, she'll take the other end of those things and she'll whip me with them like with the thorns. And there's no ways I'm giving her flowers. You see, his investment into his life has dried up and stopped. And so there's nothing coming from her. And so an investment, time to talk, time to plan. And when conflict happens, time to sit down and express what really is at stake. And then we need to, number five, pick a time and a place to resolve the conflict. Sometimes it shouldn't be handled right away, especially when two cowboys are married to each other. Sometimes it needs a bit of a breather. I'm not talking about days, I'm talking about hours. And a time and a place set aside to put all the generalizations, all the other things aside, and to face the realities themselves. And then as you contemplate before you go and resolve the conflict, we should be asking ourselves this question: is it worth it? Is his underwear on the floor worth 6 days of pain in my marriage? Is expressing this thought about his father worth a month of pain in our marriage? Is it really worth it? Because the goal is union, remember. And these things undo the union. Number 7. It says in James that the reason that we have conflict is because of our evil desires within us and we don't get what we want. So very often conflict arises out of sin. And we sin not only to our spouse, but we sin before God himself. And so very often before a resolving of conflict really is fulfilled, repentance needs to take place, where you before the Lord and say, God, I repent for having treated my wife in this particular way. And then last 2 thoughts. One of the most helpful words that you can say, other than I am sorry, is I hear you. Even if you don't fully understand, because most often conflict comes out of misunderstanding, people not being heard, not being understood, their point of view not being considered. When your primary objective is union, you're able to put your rights aside and say, okay, I need to hear because we've missed each other. I need to hear what she's saying. I need to hear what she's, not presume, not impose my thoughts on why she did what she did. I hear you. Or I don't really understand. I want to hear you. Could you say that again? Could you help me understand that? And then finally, I'm going to suggest that you pray. If you're married to a believer, the way you resolve conflict is before the throne of heaven. I can remember in my early years of marriage, I'm married to an Eskimo. I'm a bit of a cowboy. And so my wife would be quite happy just to turn over and go and sleep in the early stages of our marriage. And I used to insist before I went to sleep that she prayed for me. If I was suspicious that she was hiding herself, frosting herself over in her little igloo. And I knew because of her sincere relationship with the Lord, she would never be able to go and pray for me if she hadn't resolved that particular issue. And so I trust that as you walk out of here, that you're not fearful of disagreement, but yet you're filled with faith, knowing that God backs you. It's God's idea that you won, God's idea that you're united, and his grace is for those who want to honor their covenant of marriage and to do it God's way. God bless you.